The truck shuddered once, twice, then coughed out its last breath, just as the last streaks of sunlight slid behind the distant hills. Evan's hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white against the worn leather. The engine rattled feebly, then fell silent, leaving only the low, insistent buzz of cicadas pressing in from the hedges by the roadside. Somewhere, far off, a lone bird gave a brief, mournful call before the night swallowed it whole. "We're dead," Evan muttered, the words catching somewhere in his throat. He swore he could hear his own heartbeat pounding loud enough to drown out the growing stillness around them. The truck sat crookedly near the shoulder of a long, lonely stretch of road, the flat fields, beyond, darkening to shadow. No lights winked in the distance, no promise of quick rescue, just the wide-open country and a sinking sun folding behind it. Milo shifted in the passenger seat, the subtle flicker of apprehension crossing his warm hazel eyes as he glanced at the dashboard. "I can try the starter again," he offered, tentative, reaching for the keys. But even as he moved, he didn't expect more than a dead silence to answer him. Evan shook his head before Milo's fingers could touch the ignition. No point. Whatever it is, maybe the alternator or the battery, it's not going to fix itself out here. "I don't even know where the closest town is." "Could be miles." Milo's mouth pressed into a thin line before he finally looked out the window, voice low and careful. "There's that cabin, the one my grandfather used to mention. Maybe 10, 15 minutes that way if we hoof it. Could be a place to crash until morning." Evan sighed, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The idea of walking into the cold evening with only the decades-old memory of a cabin for shelter was hardly comforting, but the alternative was worse, sitting stranded in silence, the dark tightening like a noose around them. "All right," Evan said after a long pause, gripping the door handle and pushing it open. Despite the chill that seeped in immediately, let's see if the cabin's still standing, at least. They stepped out into the fading light together, the heavy air humming with the quiet sounds of evening. An orchestra of rustling leaves, distant insects, and the faint crackle of dry grass underfoot. The earth was cold and hard beneath their boots as they walked side by side. The road behind them swallowed fast by growing shadows. Neither spoke much, the silence between them dense with more than just the night. It was the awkward kind that had slipped into their friendship over the years, unspoken and unreasoned, as if the months and miles that had stretched between them carried invisible walls. They had been friends once, before all the years and the quiet drifting apart, but neither dared cross the chasm that had opened unexpectedly, uninvited, long ago. Milo's breath came out in soft puffs, visible in the evening air. Evan stole a glance at him, noting the slight crease between his brows, the way the dimming light caught a few strands of golden hair curling at Milo's nape. It made his throat tighten, strangely, like a word caught on the tip of his tongue he could never quite say. "Still, think this cabin's real?" Evan finally asked, voice rough but careful. Milo nodded, a shadow of a smile flickering. "Grandpa used to tell me stories about it. He said it was his hiding spot during storms or when the hunting season got too rough. I haven't been there in years, but I think it's still standing. If not, we can figure something out. We'll take our chances." The word slipped out quieter than he intended, softer somehow. The truck felt 100 miles away now, forgotten and futile, while the night pressed in, cold and expecting. The path to the cabin wound through thinning woods, the trees standing like quiet sentinels watching their progress. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, sharp and comforting, all at once. Footsteps crunched against scattered twigs and loose stones. Above, the sky was bleeding into dusk-fading blues and purples deepening into the obsidian of true night. "Milo," Evan's voice broke the silence again, hesitant but insistent. "Thanks for coming with me on this trip. I know I should have invited you sooner. It's just..." He trailed off, unwilling to untangle the mess of guilt and doubt knotted deep inside him. Milo shrugged, the faintest shrug that barely disturbed the stillness between them. Doesn't matter when, just here. Now. Evan nodded, touched by the simplicity. But the weight of everything unspoken still crushed the space between their words. When the rough outline of the cabin appeared through the thinning trees, a squat wooden structure with peeling paint and a sagging roof, something inside Evan loosened, the tight coil of anxiety unwinding just a little. The porch sagged under the weight of years, and the single window was cracked, dimly illuminated by the last lingering light. They crossed the threshold into a small dark room, the cool air inside thick with the scent of old wood and dust. Milo fumbled with the rusty latch of a box near the hearth, and managed to spark a fire with a few dry twigs and a flicker from his lighter. The small flames caught and leapt hungrily, casting wobbly shadows against the walls. Evan dropped his backpack with a sigh, the silence inside, suddenly far heavier than outside. He forced himself to look at Milo, whose face was lit by the flickering firelight, revealing the honest warmth in his gaze. "Do you want some coffee?" Milo asked, rising from a creaky wooden stool near the hearth. "Yeah," Evan said, grateful for the offer, his voice rough from the cold. He watched as Milo rummaged through an old tin in the corner, retrieving a battered kettle and some coffee grounds. The stove, old and stubborn, took a few tries before the water finally began to bubble. Steam spiraled upward, and the rich, earthy smell of coffee filled the tiny cabin, wrapping around them like a fragile thread connecting two islands adrift. Evan took the cup Milo offered, with a hand that trembled just enough to betray him. Their fingers brushed briefly, electricity blooming where skin met skin, and then they both pulled back quickly, as if the simple touch had left a trace neither was ready to face. They settled near the fire, the glow warming their faces, but failing to warm the ache of distance that lingered undissolved. "Remember when we used to camp? Near the lake?" Milo's voice was soft, almost a whisper, breaking the heavy silence again. Evan smiled, a ghost of the innocent days slipping back. "Yeah, you always tried to convince me to go swimming at dawn. Said it was the best part of the day." He laughed, low and real, the sound surprising both of them. Milo's dimple showed then, faint but genuine. "You never went, too afraid to get wet." "Maybe I just didn't want to see you disappear beneath the water," Evan admitted, words hanging between them like a secret unlocked. Milo shifted, eyes flicking away for just a moment before returning. "I'm glad you're here. Funny how a broken truck got us stuck together again. Maybe it was supposed to happen." The admission sent a rush of something unspoken between them, something tender and terrifying all at once. The fire sputtered and popped, smoke curling up the chimney in delicate spirals, while their gazes grew bolder, searching for something neither could name aloud. Evan wanted to tell Milo everything he'd kept buried. The years spent watching from the sidelines, the moments he'd longed to reach out, but was too scared. Instead, he just raised his cup a little higher, catching Milo's eyes with a tremor of hope in them. Milo returned a silent toast, the slight smile deepening into something real, something that felt like home. Outside, the night had fallen. Fully stars glittered bright over the lonely cabin, silent witnesses to the fragile truce between two hearts, once distant, now quietly learning to beat in step again. Milo crouched near the scattered tools on the wooden floor, his movements careful and deliberate as he gathered, wrenches, screwdrivers, and stray bolts, stacking them neatly in a battered canvas bag. The oil-stained maps they'd found folded up in a drawer lay beside him, crinkled and faded from years of use, edges frayed as if they'd traveled more than just the cabin's worn floors. Evan sat on the edge of the threadbare sofa, the leather cracked from age, his fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air. His gaze stayed fixed on Milo, watching the way his friend's hands moved, efficient yet gentle, like handling something far more fragile than tools and paper. There was a tenderness in the way Milo smoothed the maps flat before folding them carefully, as though he were trying to preserve more than just directions and roads. Evan's heart fluttered uncomfortably, a mingling of nostalgia and something deeper he couldn't name yet. The distance between them, a vague space that had always seemed impassable, felt smaller now. The air itself somehow softer, closer. Yet neither of them made a move to close it. Neither dared to reach out, measured by old habits and unspoken fears, as if the fragile truce they'd built only moments ago might shatter with the smallest careless step. Evan's eyes drifted over Milo's profile, the curve of his jaw faintly illuminated by the flickering firelight, the slight crease forming between his brows in concentration, the way his mouth parted just a fraction when he swallowed. He remembered when those lips smiled easily, and he longed to see that again, without the shield of distance. Was it foolish to hope that this night could unravel years of silence, or was it simply the way old friends found their way back to each other, when nothing else in the world insisted they keep moving apart? "Milo," Evan said softly, voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "You always worked with your hands like that, like it comes naturally." His words carried both a statement and a question, an invitation to reminisce, to linger in this shared space of the past. Milo paused, eyes lifting briefly to meet Evan's. There, in the dim light, Evan saw the flicker of something guarded, something unspoken, stacked beneath the surface. Milo gave a small nod, almost imperceptible. "It's the only part of me that stayed steady," he admitted, voice husky in the quiet room. "No matter what else changes, I know I can fix a thing or two." "That's why you always hated when the truck broke down," Evans said with a teasing edge, unable to restrain the smile tugging at his lips. "You lose control." "Want to fix everything all at once?" Milo chuckled, a quiet rumble, shaking his head as if shrugging off a weight. "Yeah, and yet here I am, stuck in a cabin with a broken truck. Go figure," he grinned. Then, the dimple deepening in his cheek for just a fleeting second before he set the tools down beside the bag. They both sat back, the awkwardness of proximity slipping beneath the warmth, spreading from the hearth, a breathless kind of waiting filling the silence. Evan finally broke it, watching as Milo curled his legs beneath him on the floor, resting his chin on his knees. "Remember when we got lost, following that old hiking trail near the lake?" Evan asked, voice slow, the image unspooling vivid and warm in his mind. The sun filtering through the pine needles, their sneakers caked with mud from last night's rain. And Milo's impatience with every wrong turn. Milo rolled his head to look at him, eyes bright despite the shadows. "God, you wanted to turn back so many times. I thought you were going to call it quits half an hour after setting out." Evan chuckled, the sound easier now, slipping from him without hesitation. "I was terrified we'd never find our way out. And you just kept pushing forward, like you thought you could mash the forest into submission." Milo's smile softened, a hint of vulnerability flickering behind the humor. "Maybe I thought that, yeah. Or maybe I just wanted you to see where the path led instead of turning back. Guess I felt like I needed you to trust me." Evan's chest tightened. The words lodged something tender and aching under his ribs. "I didn't want to trust you," he confessed quietly. For himself, for Milo, for the ghosts that haunted the spaces between them. "Because I was afraid you'd disappear. Always afraid of losing you." The admission hung between them, heavier than the night, raw and unvarnished. Milo's gaze steadied, intense and searching. "I'm still here," he said simply. There was no relief, no triumph in that statement. It was softer, but no less firm. Evan swallowed hard, fighting the sudden swell of emotion prickling his eyes. He looked away, toward the window where the stars sat like tiny, watchful eyes. The room seemed somehow bigger and smaller, all at once, packed tight, with history yet stretched open by possibility. The silence slowly folded back around them, no longer heavy or suffocating, but more like the space they both needed to breathe. The fire had sputtered low, casting a glow that brushed their skins with warmth, and quiet promise. Evan shifted, pulling his knees up and wrapping his arms around them. He wanted to ask more about the years Milo had slipped away, about the stories hidden beneath that broad smile and guarded eyes. But every time the conversation veered near the edges of vulnerability, Milo deflected with an easy joke or a light shift in topic. "So," Milo said suddenly, voice laced with casualness, "what's the weirdest thing that's happened to you since we last saw each other? Things got atop a broken truck stuck in an empty cabin?" Evan laughed, releasing some of the tension threading tight in his chest. "Weirdest? Probably the time I accidentally crashed a wedding because I took the wrong exit on a trip to Idaho. Ended up dancing with a stranger all night, and only realized the mistake the next morning over breakfast." Milo's eyes sparkled with amusement, and the dimple reappeared with that slow, genuine smile Evan craved. "You? Dancing with a stranger? I'd pay to see that." Believe me, it was embarrassing as hell. Evan ran a hand through his hair, the tousled dark brown strands catching the firelight. "But I think it was the first time, in a long time, I let myself just be in a moment. No plans, no expectations. Just there." Milo's expression grew softer, moments of the usual armor slipping away as he leaned back against the wall. "Sounds like you needed that." "I did," Evan said quietly. "Funny how things like wrong exits or broken trucks can throw you right where you need to be." Then, after a beat, he added, "What about you? Got any stories you haven't told me?" Milo hesitated, the flickering shadows making his hazel eyes flicker like flame. "I don't know. Mostly the usual stuff. Work, trying to fix what's broken around me. Maybe breaking a few things along the way." He laughed, but it was short, the sound not quite meeting his eyes. Evan studied him, detecting the slight twitch of muscles that betrayed Milo's effort to keep the conversation light. He knew that humor was a shield. He'd seen it 100 times before. Milo was guarded, cautious about how much of himself he revealed. Not out of mistrust, but fear. Fear of hurting, of being left behind, or, worse, rejected. "Hey," Evan said gently, "you don't have to pretend with me." There was a pause, the kind that stretches thin until the silence feels like its own language. Milo swallowed, blinking away emotions too tangled to unpack in one sitting. "I know," Milo finally said, voice low. "It's just easier sometimes to joke about the cracks than the wounds." "I get that," Evan whispered. "But maybe you don't have to carry that alone anymore." "Not tonight." Milo looked at him then, really looked. Past the shadows, past the pretense, and something vulnerable shone in his eyes. But just as quickly as it appeared, he blinked it away, standing up and stretching. "All right, enough sentimental crap for one night," Milo said with a crooked grin, the dimple returning full force. "Let's not turn this into a therapy session before dawn." Evan smiled, relief mingling with longing. "Deal. But maybe you can't avoid the quiet all night." Milo's laugh filled the room, warm and easy, and as their voices mingled with the crackle of the dying fire, the fragile pace they set, equal parts, hope and hesitation, felt less like a truce and more like the beginning of something neither was ready to name yet, but both were already dreaming of. Evan shifted the blanket around his shoulders and glanced over at Milo, who was already curled into the far edge of the couch, eyes half closed, but restlessly twitching under closed lids. The fire had finally dimmed to embers, faintly glowing like the last dying breaths of daylight, fading from the sky outside the small cabin windows. The silence was almost reverent, the kind that weighs on your chest, but also soothes it at the same time. He'd never imagined a night like this, with Milo so close, so raw, so quietly charged, and the thought sent a flutter low in his ribs that he struggled to steady. "Hey!" Evan said softly, voice barely more than a breath in the thick stillness. "Maybe I can take a look at the truck at first light. I mean, I don't want to keep you here longer than you have to, but maybe I could fix it, or at least figure out what's wrong. Milo's eyes opened slowly, revealing those warm hazel depths rimmed thick with weariness. His gaze met Evan's, steady, but there was something behind it, something Evan couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the slight hesitation before Milo spoke, or the way his brow furrowed as if trying to wrestle an invisible weight. "Don't," Milo said quietly, a sudden sharpness to his tone that caught Evan off guard. "Let's just sleep. We can figure it out when it's light for real. Right now, I mean." The bluntness was unexpected. More than that, final. Evan blinked, wrestling with the surge of something unspoken that filled the space between them. "You're tired," he tried again, voice softer this time. "That's all. We both are. I can handle the truck." "I don't mind." "No," Milo cut in, shaking his head lightly but firmly. "Just rest tonight, okay? Don't do anything stupid trying to fix some dumb old engine at dawn. I'll call a mechanic if I have to." Evan frowned, feeling the sting of rejection, not in words, but in the unyielding set of Milo's jaw, the way his hand tightened briefly into a fist against the couch blanket. There was more here, beneath the surface, layers Evan wanted to unravel with care, but wasn't sure how. "Is it really just about the truck?" Evan's voice was a whisper now, almost hesitant, as if inviting a confession he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. "Because it sounds like you don't want me messing with it." Milo's smile was half vanished. Something brittle in the way it tried to hold shape. "Maybe I don't want this night to end," he admitted without looking up, eyes scanning the rough wood grain of the cabin wall, like they might find a way to anchor the moment. "Not just the truck. This, being with you, like this. It's rare, and I'm scared of losing it as fast as it came." Evan's breath caught hard in his throat, a mix of surprise and something deep and fierce blooming somewhere beneath his ribs. He had feared rejection, expected it honestly, but hearing Milo voice the same hesitant hope, fear mingled with it, was like a secret melody that suddenly made sense in a song he'd been trying to write for years. He reached out quietly, bridging the small distance, his fingers finding Milo's wrist with a light, tentative touch. "I'm scared too," Evan confessed, voice low and steady, tremoring just enough to betray the weight of the truth he carried. "But maybe we don't have to be scared alone anymore. Maybe. We can hold on to this, whatever it is, and see where it takes us." Milo's eyes locked with his again, vulnerability tugging at the edges of his usual guarded expression. The dimple that always appeared when he smiled flickered like a candle flame, fragile but real. There was a moment suspended between heartbeats, where everything else, the past arguments, the distance, the unspoken fears, seemed to fall away, leaving only the quiet promise of now. "Yeah," Milo agreed, the barest nod that held more weight than any words could. "Let's just rest then." Together, Evan squeezed his wrist, gently, before letting go, pulling the blanket tighter around himself and settling into the couch's worn embrace. Sleep, though, did not come easily. His mind replayed the night's conversations, every pause and glance, every subtle shift in Milo's tone that betrayed more than just weariness. Hours later, when the first blush of dawn began to seep in through frosted cabin windows, Evan's sleep finally broke, not with the jarring shriek of an alarm, but with the soft sound of breath drawn in sharply. He opened his eyes, slowly adjusting to the pale light filling the room, and immediately became aware of the weight beside him, shifting. Milo was awake, sitting up now on the couch, wrapped in the same blanket they'd shared, but with a tension in his shoulders that Evan hadn't noticed before. His gaze was fixed on the window, watching the slow rise of dawn as if waiting for something just beyond the horizon. For a long moment, Evan simply watched him. There was something achingly familiar, yet new in the way Milo's profile was outlined by the soft morning light. Tousled, sandy curls, lightly catching the glow, his warm hazel eyes reflecting hues of gold and pale blue. He looked like a man caught between worlds, anchored here but dreaming far away. "Can't sleep either," Evan ventured gently, careful not to break the fragile spell. Milo didn't look back right away, just nodded once, voice barely audible. No, too many thoughts, too much quiet to drown them out. Evan swallowed the lump forming in his throat. That quiet tonight, it had been the backdrop of their confession, their tentative hope. But now, in the brightness of day, it was bolder, prying open corners neither had dared explore before. What kind of thoughts? Evan asked, his voice steady but soft, wanting to understand without pushing. Milo finally met his eyes, the distance between them shrinking again with the weight of all that remained unsaid. You, he admitted, the single word carrying the full force of every question, every uncertainty bottled up until now. And what this means. What it really means. The vulnerability was raw and unsettling, and yet irresistible. Evan's heart thumped loudly against his ribs, and for a moment the noise of the world fell away, until only the two of them existed in this fragile bubble of morning light and whispered truths. I don't have answers, Evan said after a beat, but I want to find them. With you, Milo's dimple reappeared, softer, less certain, but real. That scares me, more than the truck ever could. And me? Evan teased lightly, a crooked smile breaking through the tension. Milo chuckled, the sound low and warm, something like relief and affection mingled with fear. Yeah, you too. Evan reached out again, this time curling a hand gently along Milo's jawline, thumb brushing the subtle scar above his eyebrow, a memory from years ago, soft and distant, but now charged with new meaning. The air between them thickened, electric and aching. Neither moved closer, though the longing filled the space, hovering like a soft pulse beneath their skins. Outside, the world was waking. Birds called softly, a breeze rustled the evergreens, and the promise of a new day stretched beyond the cabin walls. But inside, time slowed, held captive by a quiet moment, suspended between yesterday's past and tomorrow's unknown. Evan's voice was a whisper against the cold window pane. Whatever this is, Milo, whatever we're feeling, it's real. I'm glad I'm not alone tonight. Milo's gaze softened, and he leaned into the touch like it was the only thing holding him steady. Me too. The light continued to spill in, warm and persistent, but neither of them turned away from the window. Not yet. Not while there were still words waiting to be said, still futures to imagine, and still a truck waiting patiently in the cold outside, silent, but somehow less daunting now. For once, the fear was tempered by something stronger. Hope. And in that early morning quiet, Evan knew the night had already given them a gift, neither had expected, but both desperately needed. The silence stretched between them like a fragile thread, delicate, but holding fast against the weight of unspoken things. Milo's eyes remained fixed beyond the window, where the first blush of sunlit sky was creeping through faltering clouds. He seemed to wrestle with whatever thoughts hovered just beneath the surface, hesitant to bring them fully into the quiet room. Finally, his voice broke the stillness, low and steady, but trembling at the edges. Evan, this trip, it stirred up things I didn't realize I was avoiding. His gaze shifted back to Evan, the hazel warmth searching, vulnerable. Being on the road with you again, after all these years, made me confront feelings I buried deep, not just for some far-off idea, but for you. Evan's breath hitched, a small, involuntary sound he immediately tried to swallow. He wanted to hear more, but even those few words felt like a bridge spanning a vast chasm, trembling with possibility. Milo's admission was raw, uncloaked, and it cut through the layers of self-protection Evan had wrapped tightly around his heart. I felt it too, Evan said quietly, his voice a fragile confession. All along. But I was scared of what it could mean. Scared of losing what we had. Our friendship was the safest place I knew, and I didn't want to ruin that. Not you. not us. Milo's shoulders relaxed, the rigid tension in his stance easing as relief flooded his features. He gave a small, almost shy smile that softened the ever-present dimple, flickering in and out like a shy beacon in the dim room. I thought maybe I was the only one struggling with it. It's hard to admit, especially when everything else felt so uncertain. Evan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I kept telling myself it was nostalgia, or loneliness, or just the thrill of being out here on the road. But no. It's something real. Something I want to explore, even if it's terrifying. Terrifying, Milo echoed, the word hanging between them like a shared secret, an unspoken truth acknowledged in the fragile dawn. But not impossible. The softening glow of morning seeped deeper into the cabin, bathing their faces with gentle light, as if the day itself was willing them forward. There was a quiet strength in this confession, in their mutual recognition, that changed the room's atmosphere into something carefully hopeful, something charged with cautious optimism. For a long moment, they simply held each other's gaze, years of history. The miles traveled, the walls, built and broken, distilled into that soulful connection. It was thrilling and vulnerable all at once, and the silence that followed was no longer heavy, but rich, like the promise of new beginnings. Eventually, Milo shifted, his fingers twitching as if to reach out, then hesitating again. "Come morning, we should try fixing that truck," he said, breaking the spell with a lightness that surprised him. "If we're going to figure out what's between us, maybe we should start by tackling the one thing that's literally stranded us out here." Evan laughed softly, the sound warm and genuine, threading through the room like a balm. "Sounds like a plan," he replied. "Besides, I'm no mechanic, but maybe two heads are better than one." Milo's smile deepened, that dimple re-emerging as he found confidence in working together. "Yeah, two might just be what it takes." They rose slowly, stretching limbs stiffened by the cold night inside the cabin, then padded outside into the crisp morning air. The sky was a canvas of pale pastel hues, and the scent of pine and damp earth filled their lungs, grounding them in the here and now. The truck waited patiently, a hulking reminder of the night past and a journey yet to come. Milo popped the hood, gesturing for Evan to shine the flashlight, even though the growing daylight made the beam almost unnecessary. They leaned over the engine together, their shoulders brushing as they moved close, the contact resounding with an electric intimacy neither dared define aloud. Evan's fingers found their way to a stray strand of sandy blonde hair that had slipped away from Milo's usual neatness, tucking it behind an ear, in an absent-minded gesture that drew a quick glance and a smile. "Let's see what we're dealing with," Milo murmured. Voice low and measured, but with a hint of excitement, like this was a puzzle meant to be unraveled side by side. They worked methodically, Milo's hands confident and sure. While Evan watched and learned, occasionally reaching in to assist, his touch growing bolder when Milo met his eyes with quiet encouragement. The tension in their bodies unwound slowly, replaced by something lighter, a shared purpose, the ease of companionship rediscovered. When Milo handed Evan a wrench, their fingertips brushed. For a heartbeat, time paused. A silent exchange passed between them without words. Neither pulled away. "Got it," Evan said softly, turning a bolt with newfound certainty. The truck groaned softly in response, as if awakening from a long slumber. Milo's smile was slow and genuine. "See? We make a pretty good team." Evan looked up, green eyes shining with something deeper than relief. "Yeah, we do." They bent over the engine, side by side, voices dipping into quieter tones as they exchanged observations and shared anecdotes of past road trip mishaps. Laughter came easy, breaking over the morning like waves, washing away the anxiety that had shrouded the night. At one point, Milo leaned closer to point something out beneath the hood, his breath warm and scented faintly with the pine-scented soap he used. Evan's heart thudded painfully, not from the work but the nearness, the way their bodies aligned in soft, unspoken rhythm. The task, once daunting, transformed into a dance of gentle touches and quiet smiles, When Milo's hand brushed Evan's wrist, it lingered, not out of necessity, but something tender and deliberate. Evan caught the moment, pressing his palm against Milo's, as if grounding himself, anchoring the fragile thread of connection that was growing stronger between them. Milo squeezed back, a silent promise, a recognition of shared feeling made real in the ordinary act of fixing a broken truck. Hours passed, and sweat beaded on their brows, the chill of morning fading beneath the steady warmth of the sun's climb. The engine finally growled to life, a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated through the frame of the truck and set something tumbling loose in their chests. Milo whooped with relief, throwing a triumphant fist in the air. Evan laughed, breathless and flushed, caught in the joyful glow that awakened from shared victory. "We did it," Milo said, voice thick with satisfaction, and something softer, unsaid but implicit. "We did," Evan mirrored, still feeling the electricity of proximity and the slow, steady beating of hope stretched taut between them. As they closed the hood and stepped back, wheels of plans and possibilities began to turn in quiet harmony. The road ahead was still uncertain, but their connection, once hesitant and fragile, was now stronger, forged in confessions and the warmth of simple, honest collaboration. Side by side, without need for words, they knew the dawn held more than just the promise of a fixed truck. It carried the delicate weight of something new, something worth exploring. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. They hadn't expected the sky to darken with such sudden severity. One moment the morning sun was lifting the shadows from the grove of pines surrounding the cabin, filtering golden light through the dew-slick leaves. The next, a steady chill had fallen, dripping like cold fingers down their spines. Evan glanced upward with a frown, just as the first fat drops hit the cracked windshield of the truck, simmering on the metal like tears. "Looks like that warm spell isn't going to last," Milo muttered, tugging the sleeves of his damp shirt lower as he wiped rain from his forehead. His hair was plastered in unruly curls that stuck to his scalp, a few strands falling heavier than usual over his eyes. He glanced over at Evan with a lopsided grin that held an edge of reluctant amusement. "Guess the weather wanted to remind us who's really in charge out here." Before Evan could answer, the rain came down in earnest, thick and sudden, like a curtain drawn fast from an unseen stage. The cabin, which they had barely noticed as little more than a shelter hours before, now seemed like a lifeboat in a sea of dripping grey. The roof sang a steady rhythm above their heads, a white noise that filled the space between them with intimacy. Milo's breath hitched lightly as he stepped inside first, shaking out his damp hair and letting water pool at the doorstep. Evan followed, pulling the door closed, with a solid click that echoed like a soft release. The air inside was cool but not cold, scented faintly with aged pine and something warmly familiar, maybe old firewood or a dusty quilt stored away in a forgotten closet. They were both soaked, clothes clinging awkwardly to skin, and for a moment all they could do was peel off soggy layers and stand close, letting body heat rise between them. "You should probably dry off," Evan said, nodding toward the rickety wooden bench by the stove. "I'll stoke the fire." Milo chuckled, the sound low and unguarded. "Couldn't agree more. If I catch a cold now, you're on the hook for it." He rubbed a hand through his curls, water dripping in erratic trails onto the floorboards. "Deal." Evan cracked a smile, setting his wrench aside on the workbench, cluttered with half-forgotten tools. His fingers fumbled with the old matchbook beside the stove, waiting for the small flame to catch and spread. Already, a comforting orange glow pushed back the lingering shadows, casting soft light on Milo's face. His eyes caught that warm flicker and reflected it, deepening in color as if absorbing the fire's warmth directly into his soul. They settled near the hearth, shoulders almost touching on the narrow bench. Milo was still damp, a bit shivery, and Evan hesitated a fraction before draping his jacket over Milo's shoulders with tentative care. The fabric was rougher than Milo's skin, but the gesture was gentle, a silent acknowledgement that the night, The storm, and something more pressing, had folded them into new company. For a while, neither spoke. The rain beat a steady tattoo against the windows, and a fire popped and crackled, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. The space felt too small for the weight of their thoughts, but also perfectly scaled for the quiet intimacy growing between them. "You know," Milo finally said, voice low and a little sheepish, "I never would have thought a broken-down truck and a crappy storm would be the thing to make me stay put long enough to actually notice." Evan looked over. His grin, easy, but wary. "Notice what?" Milo's dimple deepened, but there was an uncertainty behind it, something vulnerable. "You. Not just you, technical and stubborn as always, but you. The way you keep pushing, even when things get frustrating. The way you look at the world, like you're trying to find the good in it, even when it's being a pain." Evan found himself leaning in, drawn by the truth in Milo's words and the timbre of his voice. "That's kind of what friends do," he murmured. "Yeah, friends," Milo echoed, then laughed softly. "But maybe more than that sometimes." The air thickened. Each heartbeat loud in the quiet cabin. Evan's mind raced with those words, replaying them over and over. More than that. The realization came slow, shaped like a fragile bloom unfolding in unexpected light. It wasn't just the truck or the rain or the long hours of idle time. It was Milo. It had always been him, even when Evan had convinced himself otherwise. Evan reached out, brushing a stray curl from Milo's forehead. "You know, you're kind of a terrible liar, right?" Milo snorted, shaking his head. "Maybe. I've never been great at pretending, especially not with you." "I wish you'd stop pretending," Evan said quietly. "Pretending you're someone you're not. Pretending this," he gestured vaguely between them, "isn't real." Milo's eyes darkened, vulnerability laid bare for the first time. "I guess I've been pretending I was straight because it was easier. Because I thought it meant less complications, less impossible conversations." Evan's breath caught. "Why easier?" "Because it's what I was supposed to be, what everyone expected, what I expected of myself." Milo's voice cracked just slightly, the fragile edges of his admission exposed. "But staying here with you tonight, talking like this, it's the first time I can't ignore what I'm feeling. I'm not sure what it means exactly, but I can't pretend it's nothing anymore." Evan's chest tightened. He wasn't sure when he had begun hoping for this. To hear Milo say the words, to feel the barriers between them erode. And yet, here they were, fragile and raw, perched on the edge of something that felt as terrifying as it was exhilarating. Without a word, Evan reached up and cupped Milo's face with a hand that a moment ago would have stayed stubbornly at his side. His thumb swept lightly over the stubbled curve of Milo's jaw, tracing the small dips and planes as if memorizing a secret map. Milo's eyes fluttered, closed under the weight of the touch, his lips parting slightly, breath hitching. "It's okay," Evan whispered. "You don't have to explain everything or have it all figured out right now. Whatever you're feeling here, now it's safe. I'm not going anywhere." Milo opened his eyes slowly, the corners crinkling with unshed emotion. "I want it to be safe. I want to stop pretending the whole world is going to judge me or think I'm wrong." "You're not wrong," Evan said without hesitation. "You're not less than, or confused, or broken. You're just you, and that's more than enough." The firelight flickered between them, casting long shadows on the wooden beams overhead and wrapping the small room in a gentle glow that felt like a shield against the outside cold. Milo's hand crept forward, finding Evan's and lacing their fingers together in a quiet assertion of trust. "I don't know what comes next," Milo admitted, his voice barely audible, tinged with equal parts hope and fear. "But I want to see how far we can go together." Evan's response was a slow, sure smile, the hands of the clock irrelevant compared to the slow, beating rhythm of something new growing between them. Together, he agreed. They sat like that for a long while, hands entwined, the storm muted by the cabin's walls, the fire steadily burning low. Outside, rain continued to pour, relentless but no longer threatening. Inside, miles from the places they thought they'd end up that night, two friends were beginning to learn the shape of something neither had dared to name before. And for once, the uncertainty wasn't terrifying, it was breathtaking. The fire had dwindled to glowing embers when Milo finally shifted his gaze from the flickering flames to Evan's face. The shadows played along his features, making his expression look softer, more vulnerable than usual. A quiet pause stretched between them. A fragile space where words wanted to tiptoe, unsure if they could be trusted. Then, in a voice low and unguarded, Milo broke the silence. "You ever think about how much it all could have been different?" he asked, gaze fixed somewhere beyond the cabin walls, as if seeking something intangible. "I mean, some of the choices I made, the things I didn't say. Maybe if I'd been braver, or just honest from the start, I wouldn't be so afraid all the time." Evan's thumb brushed over Milo's knuckles, steadying and warm. "I think about that too," he admitted. "Always wonder if the roads we took were the right ones, or if we just convinced ourselves they were because it hurt less." Milo chuckled softly, a sound tinged with bitterness. "That's exactly it. Pain masks itself as reason, doesn't it? Like heartbreak was some terrible accident I had no control over, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe I let it happen." The confession hung in the air, palpable, and Evan's heart tightened. His own experiences surfaced then, unbidden, memories folded beneath layers of denial and stubborn pride, the kind of pride that built fences instead of bridges. He wanted to tell Milo those stories, peel back his own walls in return, but words felt suddenly too clumsy, too harsh for the delicate silence between them. Finally, he found the courage to speak. "I was afraid once, broken up into pieces I didn't think could fit back together. I used to think I had to carry every scar alone. That showing what hurt me made me less reliable, less myself. I pushed people away with that. Even you." Milo's hand tightened like a lifeline. "I never stopped wanting to be closer, even when you didn't want it." Evan's smile was slow and bittersweet. "Same here. Guess we were both just too scared to admit it." "Scared of what?" Milo whispered. "Of being vulnerable, of losing control, of being seen and not liked for what we really are." Milo's eyes shimmered in the faint firelight, a complex mixture of relief and sadness. "I'm tired of hiding." "Me too," Evan confessed, voice barely above a whisper. "I want to stop running from the past, from myself, from this." Their fingers intertwined more firmly. The simple touch, a steady comfort in the endless, cold outside. The night deepened around them. Quiet except for the occasional crackle of the dying fire and the steady patter of rain against the cabin's roof. "Do you think," Milo began hesitantly, "that maybe we're meant to be more than just us? Friends?" Evan's breath caught. The bare honesty in that question seemed like the last piece of the puzzle they didn't dare speak aloud. "I've thought about that," he said. "More than I should have. But I didn't want to risk what we had. What if it all fell apart?" Milo nodded, the vulnerability in his gaze shimmering like a tremulous flame. "But what if it doesn't? What if it's just something new, something better?" Evan's heart thundered in his chest, hungry and hopeful. "Then I want it. I want to try." A soft smile tugged at Milo's lips, a dimple blossoming like a quiet promise. "Me too." There was a built-in fragility to the moment, as if any loud word might shatter the delicate bridge they'd started to build. But neither moved to break the silence, both wrapped in the gentle warmth of shared truths. Somewhere beyond the cabin window, the rain had slowed to a rhythmic drizzle. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside washed clean and quiet. Asterisk, asterisk, long after the first streaks of dawn had faded into soft morning light, the two men sat huddled over a steaming cup of coffee, wrapped in blankets that smelled faintly of pine and smoke. The truck, having been more thoroughly fixed than expected, stood ready outside. A solid, dependable reminder that the journey they'd started together was far from over. Still, neither was in any rush to leave the small sanctuary they'd stumbled into. The weight of everything, unspoken, hovered between them. Familiar, but transformed by the night's confessions. Evan caught Milo's gaze across the room, his hazel eyes warm, a flicker of something unspoken deep within them. Milo gave a slow, tentative smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made his usual circle of guarded calm falter. "You're really not in a hurry?" Evan asked, voice gentle, but edged with something more hope, hesitance. Milo shook his head, fingers absently tracing the rim of his mug. "No, yeah. The truck's ready and all, but I don't want to go." The simplicity of that truth felt like an act of bravery, and Evan's heart surged with something unnameable and new. "Neither do I," he admitted, the words no longer just a whisper. For a moment, silence fell again, a quiet agreement, a shared breath that filled the room. When Milo finally spoke, his voice was quieter, almost shy. "I don't even know where we go from here." Evan leaned a little closer, eyes locked on Milo's with fierce sincerity. "Neither do I, but I'm willing to find out if you are." There was a long pause before Milo smiled again, small and real. "Yeah, I am." The air between them shifted, charged with a tension that was both electric and tender. Neither dared voice the next step, but their eyes spoke volumes, a promise, fragile and fierce all at once. Outside, the world had started to stir, the first birds calling softly to a waking dawn. Inside the cabin, two hearts beat in time. Raw, uncertain, but undeniably awake. The goodbye they'd imagined dissolved, replaced by a deeper connection neither could yet define, but both desperately wanted to explore. Milo's hand found Evan's once more, fingers tangling as if trying to hold on to the moment, to the possibility, to the fragile certainty that whatever awaited them, they wouldn't face it alone. Voice unsteady, but filled with hope, just a little longer. Milo's answer came without hesitation. "I'm not going anywhere." And in the quiet that followed, beneath the soft glow of early morning light, everything they'd hidden for years lay bare between them, raw, open, and spectacularly alive. The cab was small, the worn leather seats cracked where years of use had pressed and stretched them into submission. The truck's engine hummed steadily beneath them, a low vibration that seemed to pulse with the quiet energy between Evan and Milo. Neither reached for the radio, both were acutely aware of the silence and the crackling tension threading through it, like static in the air just before a storm breaks. Milo sat in the passenger seat, fingers tapping absent-mindedly against his thigh, eyes occasionally meeting Evan's deep green ones through the side mirror before darting away, as if caught stealing a secret glance. Evan's hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, knuckles pale from the grip, though the truck rolled smoothly down the highway. Outside, the night blurred past in stretches of silver moonlight and inky shadows, trees leaning like silent sentinels watching them pass. The comfort between them was tangible. Uneasy, yes, but also steady, like coming home after a long absence. They hadn't spoken much, but their proximity, the shared warmth in such a confined space, felt like a balm to all the years and misunderstandings that had built up between them. Evan caught Milo's gaze more than once, and each time a flicker of something electric passed between them, quiet but fierce. In the corner of his eye, he saw Milo's hand inch closer, fingers twitching, as though reaching, without quite daring to. When their skin finally brushed, a mere accidental touch, as Milo adjusted the collar of his jacket, the spark shot straight through him, igniting nerves and hopes all at once. "Do you want me to turn on the heat?" Milo asked softly, breaking the silence at last, voice low enough not to upset the fragile spell. Evan shook his head, voice barely above a whisper. "No, it's fine." The chill in the air outside wrapped the truck in a coolness that contrasted sharply with the slow-burning warmth inside. Milo shifted closer, just enough to close the thin gap, but not enough to be anything more than coincidence. Yet to Evan, it felt like a deliberate bridge, one built from unspoken pleas and tentative hope. They drove on in silence, their breaths sinking unwittingly the steady rhythm of the truck's wheels. On the pavement, a grounding heartbeat to the fluttering turmoil within. Neither dared to break the fragile quiet, as if speaking might shatter the delicate thread that held them suspended. Then a sudden flash of moonlight caught on the lake's surface beside the road, a shimmering mirror set against the dark outline of trees. Evan slowed the truck, easing onto a narrow pull-off where the gravel crunched beneath the tires, and the world seemed to exhale with them. The night sky stretched wide and endless, a vault sprinkled with stars so bright it felt as if the universe itself was watching. They climbed out, the cool air wrapping around them, crisp and sharp against their warm skin. The lake lay silent and still, reflecting constellations with unblinking clarity, the soft sound of water lapping at the shore, mingling with the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze. Milo's breath fogged in the cold as he stood beside Evan, shoulders squared into the night but eyes flickering uncertainly towards the water. The silence lingered, heavy now with everything unsaid. Then Milo's voice wavered barely more than a whisper, but charged with buried weight. "I've thought about this moment a lot," Milo confessed, voice trembling with something raw and unguarded. "Not just the truck breaking down or being stuck here with you, but what it means. What it could mean." Evan swallowed hard, the words chiseling into his chest, each syllable a fragile thread weaving them closer. "I've lied to myself," Milo continued, tearing down walls built over years of self-denial, saying you were just my friend, that what I felt was nothing more than some passing thing. But it's not, and I can't do it anymore. Pretend like I don't want more. Want, asterisk. You asterisk. More. The confession hung between them like a fragile crystal, catching the starlight and refracting all the pain, hope, and fear tangled inside. Evan's heart pounded so loudly he feared Milo might hear it, feel it in the way he looked at him, open, vulnerable, so fiercely alive. Without thinking, Evan reached out, the movement hesitant, uncertain. His hand curved gently, warm and steady, brushing against Milo's cheek, with a tenderness born from years of closeted longing and quiet desperation. The skin beneath his palm was soft, a subtle heat radiating, despite the chill in the air. Milo's eyes fluttered, closed, leaning into the touch, as if anchoring himself amidst the storm of emotions that was now tumbling free. Evan's thumb traced small circles just beneath Milo's temple, his voice catching on the words he longed to say, but couldn't yet find. "I don't know what this is either," Evan admitted, voice cracked with uncertainty, yet stretched with hope. "But I want to find out with you, whatever that means. I'm tired of running from it." The vulnerability in Milo's smile was breathtaking, full of relief, disbelief, and a stirring hope that shook the stillness around them. Their breaths mingled, noses almost touching, as if the simplest closeness could rewrite the lives they'd lived separate from each other. The stars blinked serenely above them, indifferent, yet witness to the fragile promise blooming in the cold night air. Slowly, Milo's hands found Evan's fingers, lacing with effortless certainty, as if they'd been missing from each other all along, waiting for this moment to weave back together. "We'll figure this out," Milo whispered, his voice a steady anchor. Together, the weight of that word, asterisk, together, asterisk, was both a balm and a challenge. A pledge that neither could yet fully grasp, but both were willing to carry. After what felt like an eternity suspended in time, They climbed back into the cab, the air between them altered, softened, but charged with newfound possibility. Evans started the engine, the truck rumbling to life like a heartbeat. Reborn, his hands gripped the wheel, steadier now, not just with the road, but with the uncertain path ahead. As they pulled back onto the highway, the miles stretching endlessly before them, the silence was no longer heavy, but warm, filled with a promise, unspoken, yet understood. Milo's head rested lightly against the window, the dawn beginning to color the horizon, with hues of pale gold and soft pink. His fingers found Evans, once more thumb-tracing circles that spoke of comfort and connection. Neither could say what the future held, not the next town, the next day, or the next chapter of their lives, but in that moment, with the road unfolding ahead, and their hearts finally beginning to beat in time, one truth shone brighter than any star. They wouldn't face it alone. And somehow, that was everything.